Welcome to the online course on the Nibbāna Sermons 23 to 33 by Bhikkhu Ñāṇananda, an e-learning course hosted by the Numata Center for Buddhist Studies at the University of Hamburg in collaboration with the Barre Center for Buddhist Studies in Massachusetts. And today we will be looking at Sermon 24. Before getting into that, I wanted to briefly take up a few of the comments from the discussion forum regarding Sermon 23. Kim Allen on the topic of measurement and the construction of reality. She says, often this topic is treated from the perspective of the measuring instrument inevitably influencing what is measured, as has been demonstrated through quantum physics. However, the sermon indicates that the issue goes deeper still. The measuring instrument, in this case one of the six sense bases, creates the data, not merely influences it. And she says that it has been pointed out toward in the mundane world many times by postmodern philosophers, as well as radical sociologists and public health researchers. But even if one does begin to grasp this externally, there can be a sense of not knowing how to proceed. Anything we might do in our mind is itself adding a new creation. She adds that the meditation instructions accompanying the Eightfold Path are designed to undo themselves, to untangle the tangle. And a significant part of practice is learning how to stop doing. If the medicine has done its work, don't keep taking it. And Robert Grosh on measurement also. If we understand any comparison of sense data to a concept to be a form of measurement, then this would make any process of perception a measurement. Now, perception is a mental process which is usually always present. Hence we would be measuring all the time. An arahant also has perception as such, and one would have to say that he is also measuring all the time. And he adds, the arahant does indeed measure in the sense that he or she compares sense data to concepts. Otherwise he or she would be unable to recognize his or her alms ball, comparison of visual data to a familiar pattern, to pick it up, estimating the distance of the ball. He or she would even be unable to communicate, comparing data from the air sense door to familiar patterns of vocabulary and grammar. However, the arahant has no conceit, and hence does not invest all these with craving and wrong view, and thus is not holding on to them. Yeah, I very much appreciate this input. I think it is always important to stay clear with what is a general feature of experience that is also shared by arahants. And Katrina on measuring also. It seems natural and arguably useful that the mind wants to understand experience based on what it knows. Yet experience, and meditative experience in particular, can sometimes defy explanations based on comparison. At such times, words often fall short. Yeah, that's quite true, actually. Robert Grosh again on the Rohitasa. The Rohitasa Sutta really stood out for me, and here in particular the quote, "It is in this very fathom-long physical frame with its perceptions and mind that I declare lies the world, the rising of the world, the cessation of the world, and the path leading to the cessation of the world." The additional mentioning of "with its perceptions and mind" immediately caught my attention. When short references to this famous quote are made in Dhamma talks, one usually finds the perceptions and the mind dropped and forgotten about, though I think that these are absolutely crucial to this passage. Yeah, I fully agree. And Jason just gives us almost this koan-like question: what happens when there's no experience of sense and sensed? And George is another one who likes koan-like statements. Yet again, by some measure, I cling, therefore I am. Good, with this I would like to get into the actual sermon. Itang santang itang panitang yadidang sabba sankara samato sabbu paripatinisaggo tanhakayo virago nirodho nibbāna. This is peaceful, this is excellent, namely the stilling of all preparations, the relinquishment of all assets, the destruction of craving, detachment, cessation, extinction. With the permission of the most venerable great preceptor and the assembly of the venerable meditative monks. This is the 24th sermon in the series of sermons on Nibbāna. In our last sermon, we brought up a quotation from the Rohitassa Sutta, which enshrines a momentous declaration by the Buddha to the effect that the world, the rising of the world, the cessation of the world, and the path leading to the cessation of the world could be pointed out with reference to this same body with its perceptions and mind. The 6 sense spheres, or the 6 bases of sense contact, with which we acquaint ourselves with the world as it is conventionally understood and measured out, are themselves called the world, according to the Noble One's terminology. Therefore, one can declare, in accordance with the Dhamma, that the very cessation of those 6 sense spheres is the cessation of the world. It is the state of the cessation of the world that is known as asankata dhatu, or the unprepared element. That unprepared state, described in discourses on Nibbāna in such terms as Atthi bhikkhave ajātang abhūtang akatang asankatang, monks, there is an unborn, an unbecome, an unmade, and unprepared, is this cessation of the 6 spheres of sense, which is the end of that prepared world. So then this particular world's end, the end of the world as defined here, is not a destination to be reached by traveling. The sage Rohitassa walked for 100 years in search of this world's end at the speed of a flying arrow, but he failed to discover the world's end. Why? It is because he took the world along with him on his journey to see its end. Since this 6-based body, with its perceptions and mind, is itself the world, he was taking the world with him in his exploration. That is why he had to die on the way without seeing the end of the world. That end of the world, which one cannot see or reach by traveling, the Buddha pointed out in the very cessation of the 6 sense spheres. This fact comes to light in the discourses dealing with Nibbāna in the Pātaligamya Vagga of the Udāna, which we had earlier already discussed. For instance, in the first discourse on Nibbāna, beginning with the words Atthi bhikkhave tatthayatanam, this, monks, that sphere, we find towards the end the following statement: Tatra pahang bhikkhave neva agating vadami nagating natiting nachuting na upapatting appatittang appavattang annāramanang evatang esevanto dukkhassam. In that particular state, described as a sphere, in which there is neither earth, nor water, nor fire, nor air, etc., I say, there is neither a coming, nor a going, nor a standing, nor a passing away, nor a being reborn. That state, which is unestablished, not continuing and objectless, is itself the end of suffering. Comment translation by Ireland. There is bhikkhus that state where there is no earth, no water, no fire, no air, no base consisting of the infinity of space, no base consisting of the infinity of consciousness, no base consisting of nothingness, no base consisting of neither perception nor non-perception, neither this world nor another world, nor both, neither sun nor moon. Here, bhikkhus, I say there is no coming, no going, no staying, no deceasing, no uprising, not fixed, not movable, it has no support. Just this is the end of suffering. End of comment. So then this journey's end, the journey's end that cannot be reached by journeying, the Buddha pointed out in the cessation of the 6 sense spheres. We come across the following passage in the 4th discourse on Nibbāna in the Pātaligāmiya Vagga of the Udana. Nissitassa chalitang, annissitassa chalitang nati, chalitya saddhi pasaddi, pasaddiya sati nati nahoti, natiya sati agati gati nahoti, agati gatiya asati chutupapato nahoti, chutupapate asati nevida nahurang na ubhayamantare, ese vanto dukgasa. To the attached there is wavering, to the unattached there is no wavering. Wavering not being, there is calm. Calm being, there is no inclination. Inclination not being, there is no coming and going. Coming and going not being, there is no passing away or reappearing. When there is no passing away or reappearing, there is neither a here nor a there, nor anything between the two. This is the end of suffering. Comment translation by Ireland. For the supported there is instability. For the unsupported there is no instability. When there is no instability, there is serenity. When there is serenity, there is no subservience. When there is no subservience, there is no coming and going. When there is no coming and going, there is no decease and uprising. When there is no decease and uprising, there is neither here, nor beyond, nor in between the two. Just this is the end of suffering. It is in such profound terms that the Buddha described the end of the world. One cannot see it by journeying. It can be seen only by wisdom. In fact, even the very concept of going has to be transcended in order to see it. So it seems Rohitassa carried the world with him in his journey to see the end of the world. He made another blunder. He was going in search of a place where there is no death, in order to escape death. Even that the Buddha had declared is not possible to see or reach by traveling. Rohitassa took Mara along with him in his journey, to find the place where there is no death. Why do we say so? In the Radha Samyutta of the Samyutta Nikaya, we find Venerable Radha putting the following question to the Buddha. Maro ti bhante bucchati, kittavatanu ko bhante maroti bucchati. Mara, they say, Venerable Sir, to what extent is Mara called as such? Now, this is how the Buddha answers the question. Rupera ko Radha sati Maro vas maritava yava pada miyati. Tasmatya tvang Radha rupang maroti passa. Maritati passa. Miyati ti passa. Rogo ti passa. Gando ti passa. Sallanti passa. Aghanti passa. Aghabhutanti passa. Yenam eva passanti te samma passanti. Where there is form Radha, there would be Mara, or one who kills, or one who dies. Therefore, Radha, in this context, you look upon form as Mara, as one who kills, as one who dies, as a disease, as a boil, as a dart, as a misery, as a wretchedness. They that look upon thus are those that see rightly. Comment translation by Bodhi. Venerable Sir, it is said, Mara. In what way, Venerable Sir, might Mara be? When there is form Radha, there might be Mara, or the killer, or the one who is killed. Therefore, Radha, see form as Mara. See it as the killer, see it as the one who is killed. See it as a disease, as a tumor, as a dart, a misery, as real misery. Those who see thus see rightly. And here the English translation of the Samyukta Agama parallel. This is Samyukta Agama 120. Then the Blessed One said to Radha, whatever bodily form, whether past, future or present, internal or external, gross or subtle, sublime or repugnant, far or near, it should all be contemplated as being completely made by Mara. End of comment. As in the case of form, so also in regard to feeling, perception, preparations, and consciousness, the same mode of seeing rightly is recommended. So in this context, each of the 5 aggregates is looked upon as a Mara, from the point of view of the Dhamma. That is why we say that Rohitassa went in search of a deathless place, taking death along with him. From this definition, it is clear that so long as one grasps with craving the aggregates of form, feeling, perception, preparations, and consciousness, there is a Mara, a killer, and one who dies. Therefore it is that by giving up the 5 aggregates, one is freed from Mara, is liberated from death, and attains the deathless state. That is why we said that the Arahant has attained the deathless state here and now, in this world itself. The principle involved here we have already stated while discussing the law of dependent arising. Let us remind ourselves of the relevant section of a verse in the Bhadra Buddha Manava Pucca of the Parayana Vagga of the Sutta Nipata. Yang yang hi lokasming upadiyanti teneva maro anveti janto. Whatever thing they grasp in this world, by that itself Mara pursues a man. Comment, translation by Bhikkhu Bodhi. Whatever they cling to in the world, by this itself Mara pursues a person. End of comment. Because of grasping, there is becoming or existence, and with it birth, decay and death, etc. follow suit, all due to craving. That is the deep idea behind the Buddha's definition of the 5 grasping groups in terms of Mara. In fact, these 6 sense spheres, the 6 bases, are within the jurisdiction of Mara. This is evident from Mara's own words in the Kassaka Sutta of the Saggataka Vagga of the Samyutta Nikaya. Once, when the Buddha was admonishing the monks with a sermon on Nibbāna, it occurred to Mara, the evil one. Now, this recluse Gautama is admonishing the monks, and the monks are listening attentively. I must go and blind their eye of wisdom. With his evil intention, he came there in the guise of a farmer, carrying a plough on his shoulder, a goad in his hand, with dishevelled hair and muddy feet, and asked the Buddha, "Recluse, did you see my oxen?" Then the Buddha retorted, "What is the use of oxen for you, evil one?" Mara understood that the Buddha had recognized him and came out with the following boast of his superiority. Mameva samana chakku, mama rupa, mama chakku sampassa viññāna yatanan, kuhing me samanaganpa mokgasi, mameva samana sotam, mameva samana ghanam, mameva samana jiva, mameva samana kayo, mameva samana mano, mama dhamma, mama mano sampassa viññāna yatanan, kuhing me samanagantva mokgasi. Mine, O recluse, is the eye, mine are the forms, and mine the sphere of eye contact. Where will you, recluse, go to escape me? Mine, O recluse, is the ear. Mine, O recluse, is the nose. Mine, O recluse, is the tongue. Mine, O recluse, is the body. Mine, O recluse, is the mind. Mine are the mind objects, and mine the sphere of mind contact. Where will you, recluse, go to escape me? Comment and translation by Bhikkhu Bodhi. The eye is mine, ascetic. Forms are mine, eye contact and its base of consciousness are mine. Where can you go, ascetic, to escape from me? The ear is mine, ascetic. Sounds are mine. The nose is mine, ascetic. Odors are mine. The tongue is mine, ascetic. Tastes are mine. The body is mine, ascetic. Tactile objects are mine. The mind is mine, ascetic. Mental phenomena are mine. Mind contact and its base of consciousness are mine. Where can you go, ascetic, to escape from me? And here translation of the Samyukta Agama parallel. This is Samyukta Agama 246. He said to the Buddha, Gautama, the sphere of contact of the eye is my vehicle. The sphere of contact of the ear, the nose, the tongue, the body, the mind is my vehicle. He asked again, Gautama, where do you wish to go? End of comment. Now, this is how the Buddha responded to that challenge. Taviva papima chakkum, tava rupam, tava chakku sampassa viññānayatanam, yatta chako papima nanti chakku, nanti rupa, nanti chakku sampassa viññānayatayan, agati tava tatta papima. Taviva papima sutang, taviva papima ghanam, taviva papima jivam, taviva papima kayam, taviva papima mano, tava dhamma, tava mano sampassa viññānayatanam, yatta chako papima nanti mano, nanti dhamma, nanti mano sampassa viññānayatanam, agati tava tatta papima. Yours, or evil, is the eye, yours are the forms, and yours the sphere of eye contact. But where there is no eye, no forms, and no sphere of eye contact, there you cannot go, evil one. Yours, evil one, is the ear, yours, evil one, is the nose, yours, evil one, is the tongue, yours, evil one, is the body, yours, evil one, is the mind, yours are the mind objects, and yours the sphere of mind contact. But where there is no mind objects, and no sphere of mind contact, there you cannot go, evil one. Comment, translation by Bhikkhu Bodhi. The eye is yours, evil one, forms are yours, eye contact and its base of consciousness are yours. But, evil one, where there is no eye, no forms, no eye contact and its base of consciousness, there is no place for you there, evil one. The ear is yours, the nose is yours, the tongue is yours, the body is yours, the mind is yours, evil one. Mental phenomena are yours, mind contact and its base of consciousness are yours. But, evil one, where there is no mind, no mental phenomena, no mind contact and its base of consciousness, there is no place for you there, evil one. Enter Samyukta Agama. The Buddha said to the evil Mara, yours is the sphere of contact of the eye, the sphere of contact of the ear, the nose, the tongue, the body, the mind. Where there is no sphere of contact of the eye, no sphere of contact of the ear, the nose, the tongue, the body, the mind, that is not in your reach. I have arrived at and reached that. End of comment. From the Buddha's reprisal to Mara's challenge, we can well infer that there is indeed a place to which Mara has no access. That is none other than the cessation of the six sense spheres. Since it is something realizable, it is referred to as a sphere, in such context as, for instance, in the discourse on Nibbāna, beginning with the words Addi bhikkhave taddayatanam, there is amongst that sphere, etc. It is this same cessation of the six sense spheres that is referred to as papancha nirodha and papancha vupassama, cessation or appeasement of conceptual proliferation. In the Mahakontita Sutta, we discussed in our previous sermon, we found Venerable Sariputta making the following conclusive statement to the same effect. Channang avuso passayatananang asise viraga niruddha papancha niruddho papancha vupassamo. Friend, by the remainderless fading away and cessation of the six spheres of sense contact, there comes to be the cessation and appeasement of conceptual proliferation. Comment, translation by Bhikkhu Bodhi. With the remainderless fading away and cessation of the six bases for contact, there is the cessation of proliferation, the subsiding of proliferation. Enter Samyukta Agama. If one says, when the six spheres of contact have been eradicated, faded away, ceased, appeased, and disappeared, one attains nirvana and is apart from all that is baseless and false, then this is indeed what the Buddha taught. End of comment. That itself is the non-prolific state. All concepts of going, coming, being born, growing old, and dying are to be found in the prolific. They simply do not exist in the non-prolific. That is why it is inaccessible to Mara. In it, neither the sense bases, such as the eye, ear, and nose, nor their respective objects are to be found. So it is clear that the cessation of the six sense spheres is that state of release from Mara, attainable here and now. All the six sense spheres are built up on the perception of permanence. Therefore, the realization of their cessation is possible only through the perception of impermanence. The contemplation of impermanence is the path to its realization. An extremely subtle contemplation on impermanence that can bring about the cessation of the six sense spheres is to be found in the Dvaya Sutta number 2 of the Salayatana Vagga of the Samyutta Nikaya. Dvayang means a diet. There are two discourses by that name, and this is the second. A strikingly deep vision of consciousness unfolds itself in this discourse as follows. Dvayang bhikkhave paticca viññānaṃ sambhoti. Katancha bhikkhave dvayang paticca viññānaṃ sambhoti. Chakkuncha paticca rūpecha uppajjati chakku viññānaṃ. Chakku aniccaṃ viparinami anyatha bhavi. Rupa anicca viparinamino anyatha bhavino. Itte tang dvayang chalancheva vyayancheva aniccaṃ viparinami anyatha bhavi. Chakku viññānaṃ aniccaṃ viparinami anyatha bhavi. Yopi hetu yopi paccaya chakku viññānasya upadaya sopi hetu sopi paccaya anicco viparinami anyatha bhavi. Aniccaṃ kopāna bhikkhave paccayaṃ paticca uppannaṃ chakku viññānaṃ kutto niccaṃ bhavisati. Yako bhikkhave imesaṃ tinnaṃ dhammānaṃ saṅgati sannipato samavayo ayam bucchati bhikkhave chakku sampasso. Chakku sampasso pi anicco viparinami anyatha bhavi. Yopi hetu yopi paccayo chakku sampassassa upadaya sopi hetu sopi paccayo anicco viparinami anyatha bhavi. Aniccaṃ kopāna bhikkhave paccayaṃ paticca uppanno chakku sampasso kutto nicco bhavisati. Putto bhikkhave vedeti putto citteti putto sanjanati. Itete pi dhamma chalaceva vayacha anicca viparinamino anyatha bhavino. Even by listening to it, one can easily guess that there's a string of terms giving the idea of impermanence. Let us now try to translate it. Dependent on a diet, monks, consciousness comes to be. How is it, monks, that consciousness comes to be dependent on a diet? Depending on I and forms arises I consciousness. I is impermanent, changing, becoming otherwise. Forms are impermanent, changing, becoming otherwise. Thus, this diet is unstable, evanescent, impermanent, changing, becoming otherwise. I consciousness is impermanent, changing, becoming otherwise. Whatever cause and condition there is for the arising of I consciousness, that cause, that condition too is impermanent, changing, becoming otherwise. How can I consciousness, arisen in dependence on an impermanent condition, be permanent, monks? That concurrence, that meeting, that togetherness of these three things, monks, is called eye contact. Even the eye contact, monks, is impermanent, changing, becoming otherwise. Whatever cause and condition there is for the rising of eye contact, that cause and condition too is impermanent, changing, and becoming otherwise. How can eye contact, arisen in dependence on an impermanent condition, be permanent, monks? Contact with monks one feels, contact with one intends, contact with one perceives. Thus these things too are unstable, evanescent, impermanent, changing, and becoming otherwise. Comment translation by Bhikkhu Bodhi. Because consciousness comes to be in dependence on a diet. And how, because does consciousness come to be in dependence on a diet? In dependence on the I and forms, there arises I consciousness. The I is impermanent, changing, becoming otherwise. Forms are impermanent, changing, becoming otherwise. Thus this diet is moving and tottering, impermanent, changing, becoming otherwise. I consciousness is impermanent, changing, becoming otherwise. The cause and condition for the arising of I consciousness is also impermanent, changing, becoming otherwise. When Bhikkhu's I consciousness has arisen in dependence on a condition that is impermanent, how could it be permanent? The meeting, the encounter, the concurrence of these three things is called eye contact. Eye contact too is impermanent, changing, becoming otherwise. The cause and condition for the arising of eye contact is also impermanent, changing, becoming otherwise. When Bhikkhu's eye contact has arisen in dependence on a condition that is impermanent, how could it be permanent? Contacted Bhikkhus one feels, contacted one intends, contacted one perceives. Thus these things too are moving, tottering, impermanent, becoming, changing, and otherwise. And here I have pasted in the Samyukta Agama parallel, and it also gives the basic idea of the two conditions for the arising of consciousness. And then it says that if there are recruiters or Brahmin who say this is not the diet, what the recluse Gautama said, that this then with such a statement is unacceptable. It's out. They are saying something that's outside of their domain. So the Samyukta Agama parallel is different in that it doesn't give the emphasis to impermanence that we have found in the Pali version. End of comment. The sutta proceeds in this way, stressing the impermanence of the other sense spheres as well: the ear, the nose, the tongue, the body, and the mind. This entire discourse vibrates with the tone of impermanence. It is the law of dependent arising that the Buddha presents here with reference to the six sense spheres. In other words, how the world gets built up. It is not founded on stable existing things, but on what is impermanent, unstable, and changing, whose nature is to become otherwise. This is how the entire perception of the world is built up. Its foundation is always crumbling, changing, and transforming. Generally, in the discourse dealing with the question of sense restraint, one comes across the phrase na nimitta gahi na nubyanchana gahi. He doesn't grasp a sign, nor does he dwell on its detail. The tendency to grasp a sign in regard to the objects of the six senses is the result of the perception of permanence. Due to the perception of permanence, there's a grasping of signs, and due to that grasping of signs, influxes flow in. Proliferations through craving, conceits, and views get heaped up. This is how our world is constructed. This is the way the aggregates of attachment get accumulated. On the other hand, the contemplation of impermanence that leads to the signless concentration is helpful in freeing the mind from these signs. Comment, the point here is again, and this is a topic that Robert Roche has been bringing up in the last sermon in relation in the form discussion, to keep in mind that the Arahants also use signs for their perceptual process, but they don't grasp, they don't cling to them, and they are aware, of course, of their impermanent nature. End of comment. The reflection on an object can be of two types. Where there is a perception of permanence, the tendency is to grasp the object tenaciously and hang on to it. This pervert tendency is known as paramasana. It is impelled by the triple proliferations of craving, conceits, and views. Under its influence, one is carried away by prolific perceptions, papancha sanya, and is kept under the sway of worldly concepts and designations born of prolific perceptions, papancha sanya sankha. On the contrary, the perception of impermanence fosters a detached and observant attitude in reflection, which is known as samasana. It is that healthy attitude which progressively leads to the liberation of the mind from the influence of signs, and attenuates the prolific tendencies to craving, conceits, and views. This kind of reflection is the harbinger of insight. Contemplation of impermanence on these lines effectively puts an end to this entire mass of samsaric suffering, as is evident from the following powerful declaration by the Buddha in the Khanda Samyutta. Anicca sanya bhikkhave bhavita bahulikata sabbang kama ragam pariyadiyati sabbang rupa ragam pariyadiyati sabbang bhava ragam pariyadiyati sabbang avidyang pariyadiyati sabbang asmimanang pariyadiyati sammuhanati. The perception of impermanence, monks, when developed and intensely practiced, extirpates all sensual lust, extirpates all lust for forms, extirpates all lust for existence, extirpates all ignorance, and extirpates and eradicates the conceit M. Comment translation by Bhikkhu Bodhi. Because when the perception of impermanence is developed and cultivated, it eliminates all sensual lust, it eliminates all lust for existence, it eliminates all ignorance, it uproots all conceit I am. And the Samyukta Agama parallel. At that time, the Blessed One said to the monks, the perception of impermanence, cultivated, much cultivated, enables one to abandon all craving for sensual pleasures, craving for form, craving for the formless, restlessness, conceit, and ignorance. End of comment. The contemplation of impermanence therefore strikes at the very root of this entire mass of samsaric suffering. The discourse on the diet, quoted above, amply illustrates this fact. The recurrent terms like chala, unstable, and vaya, evanescent, in the passage indicate that the entire superstructure of sensory knowledge is founded on a certain pervert attitudes. An imperceptible impermanence underlies it. In a number of sermons, we had to bring up the simile of the motion picture. The simile is not our own, but only a modernization of a canonical simile used by the Buddha himself. The point of divergence was the question the Buddha had addressed to the monks in the Gandula Sutta. Dittang vo bhikkhave charanang nama chittang? Monks, have you seen a picture called a movie? The monks answer in the affirmative, and so the Buddha proceeds. Tampiko bhikkhave charang nama chittang chitteneva chintitang. Tena piko bhikkhave charanena chittena chittanyeva chittatarang. Monks, that picture called a movie is something thought out by the mind. But the thought itself is even more picturesque than the picture. Comment translation by Bhikkhu Bodhi. Bhikkhus, have you seen the picture called faring on? Yes, Venerable Sir. Even that picture called faring on has been designed in its diversity by the mind. Yet the mind is even more diverse than that picture called faring on. And here's the translation of the Samyukta Agama. Have you seen the variegated and different colors of a charana bird? Comment on the comment. The charana bird is a mistranslation here in the Chinese. A misunderstanding of the Indic original. End of the comment in the comment. The monks replied, we have seen it before, Blessed One. The Buddha said to the monks, like the variegated and different colors of a charana bird, I say the mind is also variegated and different, just like that. Why is that? Because of the variegation of its mind, that charana bird is of variegated colors. Now here I have a comment that the original seems to have misunderstood the charana reference and then believed that in some way it refers to a bird. The idea of this charana picture seems to reflect a mode of preaching and teaching that we know from ancient India, where presumably Brahmins would carry around some sort of a canvas that could be unrolled and then show images or depictions of teaching they were giving. We may imagine, for example, a teaching on the hell realms, and the evil retribution for certain acts, and they could have this canvas which shows this depicted in quite vivid forms. And this would have been a convenient way in the ancient setting to illustrate and give some visible element to an oral presentation. If we think that this has been a time in ancient India where they had hardly any other visual input of the type we are used now, then such a Charanama Chittang kind of carry along image could have quite an impact and could be seen as quite picturesque from the viewpoint of those ancient times. And then to say that the mind, invisible as it is even more picturesque is really catching the point, I think, that the discourse wants to make. End of comment. To say that it is more picturesque is to suggest its variegated character. Thought is intrinsically variegated. We have no idea what sort of a motion picture was there at that time, but the modern-day movie has a way of concealing impermanence by the rapidity of projections of the series of pictures on the screen. The rapidity itself gives an impression of permanence, which is a perversion, vipallasa. The movie is enjoyable because of this perversion. Due to the perception of permanence, there's a grasping of signs, and in the wake of it, influxes flow in, giving rise to proliferation, due to which one is overwhelmed by reckonings born of prolific conceptualization, papancha sanya sankar. That is how one enjoys a film show. All this comes about as a result of ignorance or lack of awareness of the cinematographic tricks concealing the fleeting, vibrating, and evanescent nature of the scenes on the screen. Though we resort to such artificial illustrations by way of a simile, the Buddha declares that actually it is impossible to give a fitting simile to illustrate the rapidity of a thought process. Once he proclaimed, Upama pi na sukara yava lahu parivattang chittam. It is not easy even to give a simile to show how rapidly thought changes. Sometimes the Buddha resorts to a double entendre to bring out piquantly some deep idea. He puns on the word chitta, thought or picture, in order to suggest the picturesque or variegated nature of thought. When he asserts that thought is more picturesque, chittattara, than the picture, we can see that it is quite reasonable in the light of the Dvayang Sutta. It is this series of picturesque formations that gives us a perception of permanence, which in turn is instrumental in creating a world before our eyes. Our eye changes every split second. It is quivering, vibrating, and transient. So also are the forms. But there is a malignantly pervert idea ingrained in samsaric beings, known as the perception of permanence in the impermanent, anicca nicca sanya, which prevents them from seeing the inherent transience of eye and forms. That is how the six spheres of sense create a world before us. It is the substructure of this sense-created world that the Buddha has revealed to us in this particular discourse on impermanence. The substructure, on analysis, reveals a duality. Dvayang bhikkhave paticca viññāṇaṃ sambhoti, dependent on a dyad monks arises consciousness. Consciousness is not something substantial and absolute, like the so-called soul. That is precisely the point of divergence for Buddhism when compared with those religious systems which rely on soul theories. In the Dhamma there is mention of six consciousness as Chakra Viññāna, Sota Viññāna, Ghana Viññāna, Jiva Viññāna, Kaya Viññāna, and Mano Viññāna. Eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind consciousness. Every one of these consciousness is based on a dyad. Just as in the case of eye consciousness, we are given the formula beginning with Chakkuncha paticca rupache, dependent on eye and forms. So with regard to ear consciousness, we get sotancha, paticca, sadnecha, dependent on ear and sounds, and so on. Even when we come to mind consciousness, the theme is the same. Manancha, paticca, dhammecha, dependent on mind and mind objects. Mind also is vibrating, changing, and transforming with extreme rapidity every moment. So are the objects of the mind. The entire world is structured on these vibrant, transient, and evanescent basic elements. That is the burden of this powerful discourse of the Buddha. Therefore, someone developed the contemplation of impermanence to the highest degree and brought his mind to the signless state, having started from the sign itself. It goes without saying that he has realized the cessation of the world, that is, the experience of Nibbāna. It is at the same time the cessation of proliferation, papancha nirodha. Prolific conceptualization is founded on the perception of permanence, whereby one comes under the sway of reckonings born of prolific perceptions, papancha sanya sankha. Proliferation creates things, giving rise to the antinomian conflict. Duality masquerades behind it. It is by mistaking the impermanent I and the impermanent forms as permanent that the whole confusion has come about. One imagines the I and forms as permanent, and thereby becomes blind to their momentary change and transience. The glue of craving and intoxicating influxes create a facade of a real world before him. That is the world we touch with our hands and see with our eyes. All this exposes the insubstantial nature of this world. The products of the six sense bases can be summed up by the four terms ditta, sutta, mutta, and viññāta, things seen, heard, sensed, and cognized. The Dvayang Sutta brings to light the fact that all these four are insubstantial and coreless. Due to this very fact, the Tathagata, who realized the cessation of the six sense bases, was confronted with the stupendous problem of mediating with a world that could not even imagine the frightful prospect of a cessation of the six sense bases. That is to say, when he reached the state of non-proliferation, Nibba, by experiencing the cessation of the world through the cessation of the six sense bases, the Tathagata had to grapple with the serious problem of truth and falsehood in mediating with the world. There is an extremely important discourse connected with the idea of the void, sunyata parisanyutta, which echoes this epistemological crisis in the section of the Force in the Anguttara Nikāya, entitled Kālaka Rama Sutta. This Kālaka Rama Sutta was preached by the Buddha to the congregation of monks at the Kālaka monastery in the city of Saketa. The discourse, though brief, is one that is extremely deep in its presentation of the idea of the void. Before getting down to an exposition of this discourse, by way of sketching its historical background, we may mention a few things. Apart from the mention of the venue, nothing much could be gleaned from the discourse itself as to how it was inspired. The commentaries, however, relate the episode of Chula Subhadda, daughter of Anathapindika, to explain the context in which the discourse was preached. Chula Subhadda, who was a stream winner, Sotapanna, was given in marriage to the son of the millionaire Kālaka of Saketa, a devout follower of Niganthanatha Buddha. Chula Subhadda managed to convert him by inviting the Buddha to Saketa and getting Kālaka to listen to the Dhamma. After his conversion, he built a monastery in his park and offered it to the Buddha. The commentary says that a group of 500 newly ordained monks of Saketa gathered in this Kālaka monastery and were speaking in praise of the Buddha, marveling at his extraordinary feat of converting the millionaire and the inhabitants of Saketa. It was at this juncture that the Buddha came and addressed this deep discourse to those monks. According to the commentary, the discourse was so profound that at 5 points of the sermon the earth shook miraculously, and at the end of the sermon all the 500 monks who listened to it attained arahanthood. It is chronicled in the history of Buddhism that during the great missionary movement initiated by the Emperor Asoka, Venerable Maharakita was sent to convert the country of the Yonakas. The very first sermon he preached there was based on this Kalaka Rama Sutta, on hearing which 37,000 attained fruits of the noble path. If the identification of the Yonakas with the Greeks is correct, the choice of this deeply philosophical discourse is understandable. Comment here, the additional reading for this lecture, I have my entry on Yona in the Encyclopedia of Buddhism, which explores a little bit the significance of the term and supports Venerable Ñāṇananda's suggestion. End of comment. According to the chronicles and the commentaries, another significant occasion in which the Kalaka Rama Sutta served as a theme was when Kala Buddha Rangita Theran gave an all-night sermon on the dark night of the new moon Poya day, seated under the black timbaru tree at Chetiyapabada in Sri Lanka. King Saddhatissa was also present in the audience. The fact that this discourse was held in high esteem is evident from its historical background. As in the case of many other deep discourses, here too we are faced with the problem of variant readings. Even the commentator is at a loss to conclude, and editors go their own way. We have to wade through the variant readings to make some sense out of the discourse as it is handed down. Let us now take up the relevant portions of this abstruse discourse. Yang bhikkhave sadevakassa lokassa samarakassa sabrahmakassa sassamana brahmaniya pajaya sadeva manussaya diddang sutang mutang vinyatang pattang pariyesitang anuvicharitang manasa tang ahang janami. Yang bhikkhave sadevakassa lokassa samarakassa sabrahmakassa sassamana brahmaniya pajaya sadeva manusaya dittang sutang mutang vinyatang pattang pariyesitang anavicharitang manasa tangahang abbanyasing tang tathagatassa viditang tang tathagato na upattasi. Yang bhikkhave sadevakassa lokassa samarakassa sabrahmakassa sassamana brahmaniya pajaya sadeva manusaya dittang sutang mutang vinyatang pattang pariyesitang anavicharitang manasa tangahang na janami iti vadayam tang mama asamusa tangahang janami cha na cha janami iti vadayam tam passa tari samevam tamahang neva janami na janami iti vadayam tang mama asakali. Itiko bhikkhave tathagato ditta dattabbang dittang namanyati adittang namanyati dattabbang namanyati dattarang namanyati sutta suttabbang suttang namanyati asuttang namanyati suttabbang namanyati suttarang namanyati mutta muttabbang muttang namanyati amutang namanyati muttabbang namanyati muttarang namanyati vinyata vinyatabbang vinyatang namanyati avinyatang namanyati vinyatabbang namanyati vinyattarang namanyati. Itiko bhikkhave tathagato ditta sutta mutta vinyatabbesu dhammesu thadi jivatadi tamha cha panatadimha anyo tadi uttaritarova panitatarova nattiti vadami. Yang kinchi diddang va sutang mutang van ajositang satcha mutang paresang nate sutadi sayasang bhutesu satchang musava pi parang daheyam etancha sallang patigaccha disva ajosita yanta pajavisatta Janami pasami tadeva etam achositam nanti tathagatanam. Monks, whatsoever in this world with its gods, Maras and Brahmas, among the progeny consisting of recluses and Brahmins, gods and men, whatsoever is seen, heard, sensed, cognized, thought after, and pondered over by the mind, all that do I know. Monks, whatsoever in the world with its gods, Maras and Brahmas, among the progeny consisting of recluses and Brahmins, gods and men, whatsoever is seen, heard, sensed, cognized, thought after, and pondered over by the mind, that have I fully understood. All that is known to the Tathagata, but the Tathagata has not taken his stand upon it. If I were to say, monks, whatsoever in the world with its gods, Maras and Brahmas, among the progeny consisting of recluses and Brahmins, gods and men, whatsoever is seen, heard, sensed, cognized, thought after, and pondered over by the mind, all that I do not know, it would be a falsehood in me. If I were to say, I both know it and know it not, that too would be a falsehood in me. If I were to say, I neither know it nor am ignorant of it, it would be a fault in me. Thus, monks, the Tathagata does not imagine a visible thing as apart from seeing. He does not imagine an unseen. He does not imagine a thing worth seeing. He does not imagine a seer. He does not imagine an audible thing as apart from hearing. He does not imagine an unheard. He does not imagine a thing worth hearing. He does not imagine a hearer. He does not imagine a thing to be sensed apart from sensation. He does not imagine an unsensed. He does not imagine a thing worth sensing. He does not imagine one who sees, one who senses. He does not imagine a cognizable thing as apart from cognition. He does not imagine an uncognized. He does not imagine a thing worth cognizing. He does not imagine one who cognizes. Thus, monks, the Tathagata, being such in regard to all phenomena, seen, heard, sensed, and cognized, is such. Moreover than he who is such, there is none other higher or more excellent, I declare. Whatever is seen, heard, sensed, or clung to and esteemed as truth by other folk, midst those who are entrenched in their own views, being such, I hold none as true or false. This barb I beheld well in advance, whereon mankind is hooked, impaled. I know I see it verily so, no such clinging for the Tathagatas. Comment translation by Bhikkhu Bodhi. Because in this world with its devas, Mara and Brahma, among this population with its ascetics and Brahmins, its devas and humans, whatever is seen, heard, sensed, cognized, reached, sought after, examined by the mind, that I know. Because in this world with its devas, Mara, Brahma, among this population with its ascetics and Brahmins, its devas and humans, whatever is seen, heard, sensed, cognized, reached, sought after, examined by the mind, that I have directly known. It has been known by the Tathagata, but the Tathagata did not become subservient to it. Because if I were to say, in this world with its devas, etc., whatever is seen, heard, sensed, cognized, reached, sought after, examined by the mind, that I do not know, that would be a falsehood on my part. Because if I were to say, in this world with its devas, etc., whatever is seen, heard, sensed, cognized, reached, sought after, examined by the mind, that I both know and do not know, that too would be just the same. Because if I were to say, in this world with its devas, etc., whatever is seen, heard, sensed, cognized, reached, sought after, examined by the mind, that I neither know nor do not know, that would be a fault on my part. So, having seen what can be seen, the Tathagata does not misconceive the seen, does not misconceive the unseen, does not misconceive what can be seen, does not misconceive one who sees. Having heard what can be heard, he does not misconceive the heard, does not misconceive the unheard, does not misconceive what can be heard, does not misconceive one who hears. Having sensed what can be sensed, he does not misconceive the sensed, does not misconceive the unsensed, does not misconceive what can be sensed, does not misconceive one who senses. Having cognized what can be cognized, he does not misconceive the cognized, does not misconceive the uncognized, does not misconceive what can be cognized, does not misconceive one who cognizes. Thus, because being ever stable among things seen, heard, sensed, and cognized, the Tathagata is a stable one. And I say there is no stable one more excellent or sublime than that stable one. Amidst those who are self-constrained, the stable one would not posit as categorically true or false anything seen, heard, or sensed, clung to, and considered truth by others. Since they have already seen this dart, to which people cling and adhere, saying, I know, I see, it is just so, the Tathagatas cling to nothing. End of comment. In the first statement, the Buddha declares that he knows, Tanahang Janami, whatever is seen, heard, sensed, cognized, thought after, and pondered over by all beings in the world. And that is the sum total of the knowledge acquired through the 6 sense bases. In the second statement, he affirms that the knowledge he has is of a higher order, Tanahang Abanyasing, that amounts to an understanding, Tang Tathagatasa Viditang, by virtue of which he does not take his stand upon it, he has no stance. Tang Tathagata Upattasi. The third statement flows from this detached perspective. It is to the effect that the Tathagata cannot disclaim knowledge, despite his detached attitude, as it would be tantamount to prevarication in the eyes of the world, Tang Mama Samusa. The fourth statement highlights the same incongruity, because the Tathagata placed in this awkward situation cannot compromise by both claiming and disclaiming knowledge at the same time. Tangahang janami jivadeyang tangpasatadi sameva. As the fifth statement makes it clear, the Tathagata does not deem it fit to wriggle out by neither claiming nor disclaiming knowledge of sense data. Then comes the declaration as to how the Tathagata treats this body of sensory knowledge of the worldling. Thus, monks, the Tathagata does not imagine a visible thing as apart from the seen. Itiko bhikkhave Tathagato ditta dattabbang dittangna manyati. We have come across the terms ditta, sutta, mutta, viññāta quite often. For instance, in our discussion of the Barre Center in the context ditte dittamatang bhavisati, sutte suttamatang bhavisati, mutte muttamatang bhavisati, viññāta viññātamatang bhavisati. In the seen there will be just the seen, in the heard there will be just the heard, in the sense there will be just the sense, in the cognized there will be just the cognized. In common parlance, the word seen connotes something seen. But here we have something more radical, avoiding substantialist insinuations. It is just the seen in the seen, implied by ditta in this context too. The Tathagata takes it just as a seen, without imagining that there is something substantial worthwhile seeing as apart from it. Ditta dattabbang dittang namanyati. We are already familiar with the term manjana, having discussed it in such discourses as the Mula Pariyaya Sutta and the Barre Center. It stands for imaginings prompted by cravings, conceits, and views. The Tathagata is free from such imaginings. He does not imagine a thing worthwhile seeing apart from the seen, nor does he imagine an unseen, adittang na manyati. The phenomenon of seeing is not denied. The phrase dattabbang na manyati conveys the idea that the Tathagata does not imagine that there is something worth seeing, that there is something essential in it. Dattarang na manyati, he does not imagine a seer, or one who sees. He does not project an agent into the phenomenon by taking seriously the subject-object relationship. With regard to the heard, sutta, the sensed, mutta, and the cognized, viññāta, too, the Tathagata has no such imaginings. Then, in summing up, it is said, Itiko bhikkhave tathagato ditta sutta mutta viññātabbesu dhammesu tādi eva tādi. Thus, monks, the Tathagata, being such in regard to all phenomena, seen, heard, sensed, and cognized, is such. The term tādi, too, came up in a number of our earlier sermons. We rendered it by such. It stands for the quality of steadfastness of the Arahant in remaining unshaken by the 8 worldly vicissitudes. His mainstay in this respect is attammayata, or non-identification. He is such because he does not grasp any of those things as mine. So he is such in regard to whatever is seen, heard, sensed, and cognized. There is no one who is higher or more excellent than the such-like one in point of suchness. Then comes a couplet of verses presenting the gist of the sermon. Our rendering of the sermon is in need of further explication. Though it gives a general idea, some words and phrases in the original have far-reaching implications. The basic idea behind the series of declarations made is the extraordinary change of attitude towards the question of speculative views, which marks off the Tathagata from all his contemporaries. He took a completely different turn, transcending the extremes of eternalism and annihilationism. This difference of attitude is revealed by the riddle-like statements in the first part of the discourse. One gets the impression that the Tathagata was confronted with the problematic situation of the highest order. The first statement is to the effect that the Tathagata knows whatever in the world with its gods, Maras, and Brahmins, among the progeny consisting of recluses and Brahmins, gods and men, is seen, heard, sensed, cognized, thought after, and pondered over by the mind. The second statement asserts that the Tathagata has a higher understanding of all that. All the same, he takes no stance in regard to whatever is seen, heard, sensed, and cognized. This might appear as a riddle. Usually, when one has a higher understanding of something, one is inclined to take one's stand upon it. But here we have a denial. The discourse bears some resemblance to the tetralemma we had discussed earlier. But there seems to be a difference here in the formulation of the first proposition of the tetralemma. Normally, the first proposition amounts to an unqualified assertion of the affirmative standpoint. In this case, however, we find the statement that the Tathagata not only knows all what the world knows, but that he has a higher understanding of it, abhanyāsing. It is precisely because he has a higher understanding that he takes no stance in regard to it. This might appear problematic, but let us remind ourselves of the 2 levels of understanding mentioned in the Mula Pariyaya Sutta discussed earlier, namely Sanjanati and Abhijanati. As an instance of the first level of understanding, we get the following passage in that discourse in regard to the untaught ordinary person, asuttava putujano. Pataving padavito sanjanati, pataving padavito sanyatva, pataving manyati, pataviya manyati, patavito manyati, pataving meti manyati, pataving abhinandati. He perceives the earth as earth. Having perceived earth as earth, he imagines earth as such. He imagines on the earth. He imagines from the earth. He imagines earth is mine. He delights in earth. Comment translation by Bhikkhu Ñāṇananda. He perceives the earth as earth. Having perceived earth as earth, he conceives himself as earth. He conceives himself in earth. He conceives himself apart from earth. He conceives earth to be mine. He delights in earth. End of comment. The untaught ordinary person has a perceptual knowledge of earth, sanjanati. That too is a level of knowledge. It is in fact the lowest grade of knowing. The untaught ordinary person can do no better than perceive earth as earth. Having perceived earth as earth, he takes it seriously by its face value and goes on imagining by way of craving, conceit and views, granting it object status. He imposes the grammatical superstructure on it. He imagines on the earth, he imagines from the earth, he imagines earth is mine, he delights in earth. This then is the lowest grade of knowledge. On the other hand, about the Tathagata's level of understanding, the Mula Pariyaya Sutta has the following description. Pataving patavitu abhijanati, pataving patavitu abhinyaya, pataving na manyati, patavya na manyati, patavito na manyati, pataving meti na manyati, pataving na binandati. He understands through higher knowledge earth as earth. Having understood through higher knowledge earth as earth, he does not imagine earth to be earth. He does not imagine on the earth. He does not imagine from the earth. He does not imagine earth is mine. He does not delight in earth. Comment translation by Bhikkhu Ñāṇananda. He directly knows earth as earth. Having directly known earth as earth, he does not conceive himself as earth. He does not conceive himself in earth. He does not conceive himself apart from earth. He does not conceive earth to be mine. He does not delight in earth. End of comment. The Tathagata, who has a higher knowledge of the earth, as suggested by the word abhijanati, does not entertain imaginings by taking earth at its face value. He is not carried away by the grammatical structure to imagine in such terms as on the earth and from the earth. In the present context, too, the same distinction in grades of knowledge is evident. Firstly, the Tathagata says, all that do I know, that have I fully understood, all that is known to the Tathagata. It is precisely because of this full understanding that he has not taken his stand upon it. He has no stance in regard to all that. This is the gist of the first paragraph of the discourse, which sounds more or less a paradox. It is because of this apparently queer state of affairs that the Tathagata has to confess that it would be a falsehood on his part to say all that I do not know. If someone asks whether it is because he does not know that he takes no stance, he cannot say yes. As a matter of fact, it is precisely because he has understood that he takes no stance. But the worldlings are of the opinion that knowledge of a thing entitles one to assert it dogmatically. To say I both know it and know it not, or I neither know it nor am ignorant of it, would also be mistaken by the world as a prevarication or equivocation. The first paragraph of the discourse has to be understood in this light. The commentary has it that the earth shook at 5 points in the discourse. According to it, the three significant terms jhanami, abhanyasing, and viditang, I know, I have fully understood, and all that is known to the Tathagata, represent the plane of omniscience, sabanyuta bhumi, peculiar to a Buddha. Even at the end of this proclamation of omniscience, it is said, the earth shook as a mark of approbation. Then the phrase na upattasi does not take his stand upon it, is interpreted by the commentary as indicating the plane of the influx-free one, kin asava bhumi. Why the Tathagata has no stance in regard to sensory data is said to be due to his freedom from influxes. He does not grasp them by way of craving, conceit, and views. He does not take his stand upon things seen, heard, sensed, and cognized. He has no inclination or clinging towards them. Thank you for your attention.